Good morning and welcome to Get Secure. My name is Mike Langiforti and I'm the host. I'm the VP of Marketing and Public Relations for Arrow Security. I'm happy to be joined this morning by Arrow Security's Executive Vice President and former Suffolk County Police Commissioner Richard Dormer, and Arrow Security's Executive Director of Operations and former NYPD Lieutenant Dennis Cirillo. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. Today's topic is going to be how to remain calm, composed, and in control during an emergency. But before we get to that topic, we have breaking news right now from Reuters. A judge has ruled that the NYPD's stop, question, and frisk policy is unconstitutional. Commissioner, stop, question, and frisk, controversial issue has been for some time, but arguably has also helped to reduce crime in the city.
Well, I haven't had a chance to read the decision of the federal judge, but I think people should understand that the federal judge has not, doesn't have the authority to throw out Terry versus Ohio, which was a Supreme Court decision which set up guidelines for police officers in a stop, question, and frisk situation. I'm assuming that her decision was based on the policy and procedures in the NYPD. And again, a lot of controversy about this because, as you know, murders, violent murders in New York City are down dramatically over the past few years. And the police department attributes this to their stop and frisk procedures. Their aggressive street enforcement to keep guns off the street. And then lawsuit was brought against the police department. Federal judge had a hearing, had a trial, witnesses from both sides, and now has rendered a decision. As I mentioned, I haven't had a chance to look at the decision, but I would say that it's specific to New York City and the way the procedures are carried out, the stop and frisk. It does not mean that officers cannot do stop and frisk. They still have that authority. But as a procedure or policy of the NYPD, that's what we have to look at, because I think that's what she was zeroing in on.
Right.
So again, it's going to have an impact on policing in New York City.
I agree.
And both sides of the issue have good points. You know, our Constitution is very important. We all know that. But also your safety is number one. If you can't go about your business in a safe manner on the streets of our cities, then nothing else counts.
Yeah. Well, the decision just came down about an hour ago, so it is actually breaking news. I'm looking forward to reading the judge's decision and why it came to that type of conclusion, being unconstitutional. Dennis, they were talking about that part of this decision had to do with racial profiling in the NYPD. And again, another controversial issue that has drawn spirited debate from both sides of the aisle. What say you?
Well, I think the unions weighed in on this already, and what they're cautioning their police officers and sergeants and above that you might be sued now for racial profiling under this, and that's going to really cause big problems in the city. If you have police officers that feel basically that they're handcuffed and they can't do their job, you're going to see those great numbers that the commissioner talked about going up. All right, we're going to have more homicides out there. There's going to be police officers that are going to be fearful of taking on a lawsuit against them personally. So I think this is going to be a big issue. It's a hot button issue, and could develop into a big problem.
Absolutely. And if you're just tuning in now, breaking news from Reuters that a judge has rendered a decision making the NYPD's stop, question, and frisk policy unconstitutional. Now, Dennis, I remember when you and I were on the streets, when we were on the job, it was obviously before this stop, question, and frisk became controversial. Now, arguably, stop, question, and frisk is taking guns off the street. And the men and women that I work with in the NYPD, if there was a stop, question, and frisk, A, it was legitimate. B, you didn't care who it was or what demographic they were from or what race they were from. The goal was to reduce crime and get guns off the street. And now that's coming to, obviously, they're saying, no, it's unconstitutional.
But you gotta remember that when you're out and you're doing patrol, and you're in a high crime area, a lot of times these high crime areas are demographically, minority locations. So you're out there and who are you stopping? You're stopping minorities, and I understand that. But, I think if you stop making those stops, the crime rates in those areas are gonna be greatly affected. They're gonna go up, there's gonna be more homicides, as I stated before, and there's gonna be problems.
I agree, and the other issue,
A
Commissioner.
couple of
is-
points, Mike, on the racial profiling issue. Terry versus Ohio and the DeBoer decision from the Court of Appeals in New York.
And what is Terry versus Ohio, for that
Well,
decision?
it gives an officer the authority. The Supreme Court ruled that an officer in a public place has the authority to question somebody who is acting suspiciously. And then if the questioning leads to, because of behavior or because of suspicion that the person may be carrying a weapon, the officer can now do a pat-down, which is not a search. It's a pat-down of the outer clothing of the person. And it was very specific in Terry versus Ohio on what the officer could base that pat-down on. That's not going to change. The federal judge cannot change that Supreme Court decision. As Dennis mentioned, though, what an officer now has got to worry about is if they got reasonable suspicion. And by the way, Terry versus Ohio and the officer's actions are based on behavior, not what the person looks like.
Right.
It's the behavior. Are they acting suspiciously? Is it a high crime area? Are they evasive when the officer approaches them?
And just so the
That's no
folks, know, there's different levels of legalities that the police have to follow. The first being mere suspicion, which is the lowest level, doesn't give the police many rights. Second is reasonable suspicion, as the Commissioner just mentioned, and the third being probable cause. What probable cause means that the police officer has enough facts that he can make a lawful arrest, but.
There's a scale here. In Terry versus Ohio and DeBoer, which is the New York Court of Appeals decision, which pretty much mirrors Terry versus Ohio. The officer can question somebody in a public place if they're acting suspiciously. It doesn't always lead to a pat-down. The person may explain why they're there. The officer is satisfied, and then the person moves on about their business. One other point I think we should point out about the stop and frisk. The bad guys are very much aware that, this aggressive stop, question, frisk, or pat-down is occurring in New York. So they don't carry weapons.
Right, no,
When
the
they
bad-
leave their house,
The bad guys are watching the
they
news
leave the
too.
guns at home, which, the critics of this decision or the policy are saying that not many guns are taken off the street with these stop and frisk. But a lot of them are leaving them at home, or leaving them in their vehicles, or having somebody else carry them. And so they have reduced the violence because of that factor. And I think it should be pointed out that the fear of the cops finding a weapon on me makes the bad guy think. And so that's a good thing. I think we're going to lose that now because, as Dennis pointed out, officers and sergeants and lieutenants, these are the people at the operating level, are worried about getting sued.
Yeah.
They don't want to end up in state court or federal court for violating somebody's civil rights. And a jury can go any way on that. So one officer wants to jeopardize their family, themselves,
Absolutely.
their job.
Oh, absolutely. It's gonna impact the police officer's decision as to whether to take action or not take action. And that's significant. And right in line with stop, question, and frisk, Dennis, is this, another controversial thing, putting another oversight committee over the NYPD. Another oversight committee. So you have the Civilian Complaint Review Board, you have Internal Affairs, you have federal prosecutors that investigate corruption, and rightfully so. But now, another oversight committee that's gonna have prosecutorial power, subpoena power. What are we doing here? What are we doing? You're gonna have a police force, the largest, and I believe arguably the best police force in the world. And you're gonna handcuff the police, Dennis. I just.
And that's the big problem, cops are gonna be out there on the street, I think, you know, if you're in fear for your life, you're gonna do what you have to do anyway. I mean, you're gonna pat somebody down, you're gonna make the stop. But your routine patrol, where you're looking, you know, and you're driving and you see something that looks suspicious, all right, you may have had a radio call come over maybe a half hour ago about somebody looking through cars or what have you, and now you see somebody fitting the description. Now, do you start thinking in the back of your mind, well, you know, should I get out there and make this stop now? Is this gonna be deemed racial profiling? Do you now drive on?
Yeah.
You know, these are things that might happen.
And here's what scares me. Here's what scares me the most, is you have the police that are gonna feel handcuffed. You have the police that, maybe if they would have made that stop, question, and frisk, maybe if they would have taken some action, are gonna feel handcuffed, like, maybe I shouldn't do that. And here's what concerns me the most. How many stops would the police officer have made that that gun, that bad guy, will now commit a crime, a victim crime, where somebody could be seriously assaulted or the victim of a homicide? And you have this city council that, you know, you have a mayor who's against, a police commissioner who's against it, and a city council that's saying, hey, you know what? We don't care about the possible victims. We care about following what they perceive to be the best practices. They're gonna get somebody hurt or killed, right? Am I right or wrong?
Well, you know, this is the silly season in New York City, by the way. The mayoralty race is ongoing as we speak, and as, you know, we in the police business call it the silly season. And so people pander to whatever constituency they want their votes. The cops are caught in the middle of this thing, as always. They're trying to keep people safe. They're trying to keep themselves safe. And, you know, if they work within the Constitution, and individually, every now and again, there's an issue with the constitutionality of a stop and frisk, or an arrest, or use of force, that can be litigated in court. There's a process in place to take care of that. But it looks like right now, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater with this decision. And, you know, it's tough to be a cop today.
It is.
Because you're on camera every day. Every time an officer goes out on the street, there's a camera on that cop. And so they're reviewed, critiqued all the time. They're disciplined very severely in the
Yes.
police department. If any of you have had to deal with internal affairs in the PD, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Disciplined if not arrested and prosecuted.
Yeah, now the police commissioner is appointed to run the police department, administer the police department. If you don't like the way the police commissioner is administering the police department, get a new police commissioner. But don't set up another layer of bureaucracy that's going to hamper crime fighting.
And this
Which
is what's
is not going to happen.
It's going to happen.
And it's just playing to the crowd. It's pampering. It's not necessary. Kelly and Blumberg have said it's not necessary. There are so many overviews of the police department already in place. By the way, this federal judge was one of the layers of overview that we just went through with New York City. And I should mention too, by the way, I've talked to officers and supervisors in New York City over the months, the last few months. And they tell me the stop and frisk operation has slowed down dramatically. Cops are just not doing that anymore. So it'll be interesting in what Dennis says. Will the stats prove this out over time? It takes a while for the stats to show that this is going to have an impact on street violence, which, by the way, plague our minority communities. Minority communities, many of them ask for stepped up police enforcement.
Absolutely.
They've had their children shot, stray bullets, gunfire in their neighborhood. They want the police to do something about that.
Yeah, which is why none of this makes sense. And you know what, and I hope that they are tracking these stats going forward, when they put this oversight committee in place, when they now stop, question, and frisk is unconstitutional. So city council members in New York City, if you're watching, pray that a constituent in your community isn't one of the stats based on your poor decision making. So enough said about.
Mike, let me
yeah.
finish up, by the way. The Constitution is very important. And it's very important that officers adhere to the Constitution, especially the First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and 14th Amendments of the Constitution. In the police academy, they get hours and hours of instruction on these amendments to the Constitution. So sergeants and lieutenants are very much aware of these constitutional rights, and it's at the top of their priority. And so I think that we should mention that we're not talking about throwing out the Constitution here.
Absolutely not.
We believe in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
That's what makes this country great. But stop interfering with your police department.
Stop, and stop making the police officer feel, or give the police officer pause, Dennis, to want to do their job. And this ruling and the policy about an oversight committee is gonna give our police officers pause before they take action. And that pause is what I'm arguing is gonna get somebody hurt or killed. And not just one instance, multiple.
Mike, I have no doubt that the numbers are gonna go up. You are basically handcuffing the police officer. He's gonna have a problem making a decision on what he should do out there, because all these things are in his head. The unions are gonna be pumping them that, hey, listen, be careful out there, and it's gonna be a problem. It's gonna be an issue. I have no doubt that the numbers are gonna go up.
And if I could, Mike, I'd wrap up with this thing. As you can see, I'm very passionate about this. We hire our police officers and we train them to check out suspicious activity.
Mhm.
We want our cops to do that. That's why we hire them. If you see something suspicious, check it out. That's what they do. Then if it leads to something else, so be it, as long as you follow the rules. And most of the time, the officers follow the rules. If they step over the line, there's a process in place to take care of that. So I just wanted to mention that this, this is at the core of being a police officer, where you see something suspicious outside a store, in an alleyway, people sitting in a car. Are they drug dealers? Are they looking to rob the liquor store? That kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So that's what we want our cops to do. Dennis mentioned, that's going to dampen that enthusiasm, and that's bad for policing,
It's bad.
and bad for the safety of the city.
Absolutely, and, and again, important topic, and by no means are we saying on this show that the police officers should not follow and strictly adhere to the Constitution and to the laws of the state of New York. Not saying that. And we're not saying that racial profiling is a good thing, it's a bad thing, and it's not a good practice for any police officer to follow, and I just want to be clear about that.
I think it's important to mention that we all know that internal affairs and units such as that are needed. I mean, the police department is a mirror of society. There's good and there's bad. We know there are bad cops out there, and we know that the things go on that shouldn't go on, but I think that the New York City Police Department, as well as the other local police departments, take care of that, and we don't want the black eye. We want to take care of business. If there is a rotten apple in the bunch, then we have to remove that.
I agree. And then, now moving on to, and great discussion, guys, and, but now moving on to our topic of today, and that's staying calm, staying in control, and being able to act effectively during the course of an emergency. An emergency could be anything. It could be a natural disaster. An emergency could be a crime situation, whether you're being a victim of a crime. Emergency could be anything. It could be an active shooter, as we've also discussed in the past. Acting erratic and out of control and panicky does not help in any emergency situation. We saw it with Superstorm Sandy. We see it with any time a blizzard rolls through New York City. What's the first thing that people do when there's going to be 6 inches of snow on the ground? They feel like there's not going to be any more milk supply. There's not going to be any more gas supply. There won't be any more chicken on the shelves or meat on the shelves. First thing that people do, and we see it all the time, Commissioner, and a blizzard by no means is an emergency, but they rush right to the store to get more gallons of milk than they'll ever need.
Bread and
for a
milk,
month.
bread and
Yeah.
milk, it's human nature. We understand that, and it's good to be prepared. We mentioned before the show started that we're going to enter the hurricane season now. So people should be prepared by basic items like flashlights, water and if they have a generator, make sure the generator is working. You don't want to find out the thing doesn't start when you lose your light.
Absolutely, that the oil's changed, that it's ready to go.
Yeah, but it's human nature. But what we're saying to people that are watching this show is take a deep breath. Be, prudent. We don't say that you shouldn't stock up with certain items, but don't go crazy. And it's the same thing whether it's an incident that happens at your home or you have a car crash, and that's a very traumatic event. Stay calm, take a deep breath, observe what's going on around you. You know, if it's a criminal activity, the police are going to want some information. One thing I would tell people is get the plate number. You know, nobody gets the plate number. The cops respond and it's a hit and run, or it's an assault, or it's a robbery at a store, and they see the car leaving. Did you get the plate number? And it's very frustrating when somebody can tell you the color of the car, which helps, and the direction of travel. No, I didn't get the plate number. Did you get partial plate? Very important for the investigative unit. But again, when something traumatic happens, whether it's at your home, with your children, with a family member, stay calm, take a deep breath. First thing you should do is call 911. Get the emergency people responding. Look, if it doesn't, become an emergency, they can always leave. They're not going to be upset. They'd rather you call. So if you have a fire in the kitchen, call it 911 immediately. You've got to get the fire department down there. Don't try to put a towel over it and the fire gets worse. That kind of thing.
Well, and panic is contagious. Panic is contagious. I mean, the example I always think of is yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. That's the one that we think of all the time. Panic becomes contagious. So when panic is becoming contagious, there's individuals that need to step up, and it seems to step up all the time, Dennis, that take control of the situation. They're the ones that survive, they're the ones that help out. Panic is bad. Identifying what the emergency is and taking control of a situation is important.
Mike, as the commissioner said, I think, the two Ps, he mentioned preparedness. All right, you have to be prepared. But the other thing too is to practice. All right, practice how you escape from your home in the event of an emergency. By doing simple things repetitively with your family, in the instance of a real emergency, you'll have that practice, and your mind will just simply go into that practice repetition,
Yeah,
if
I
you
mean,
will.
how many of us that have children, that your children every year have to make a poster about, where's the meeting point if a smoke condition or God forbid a fire happens? But how often do we actually practice that? Or is it just an annoyance to the parents to have to sketch this out and do a schematic of their house? But do we actually, because it's important, and it's important that they do it every year, but do we actually practice what to do? Because then people are on autopilot, Dennis.
That's right, and this is the problem when you are not practicing something like that, and you do start to panic. You have that fight or flight syndrome. All right, you want to get out of there. You're not thinking rationally. The body reacts. You're in a panic. your blood flows to the core of your body. All right, your brain is not getting what you need to get as far as blood to the head. All right, so if you're not practiced and you're not doing it, you're going to react in that situation, and you're going to be no good to yourselves, your families, or anybody else.
Absolutely, and we're not telling people that you can't be nervous. Obviously, if something traumatic is happening, it's the body's natural, it's the mind's natural reaction that you're going to be frightened. But there's a difference between, it's okay to be a little bit scared, and sometimes that even gives you an edge. But there's a difference between being a little bit scared in a situation, Commissioner, versus being scared and panicking, or even being completely out of control.
Yeah, running away can be the appropriate thing to do if you're accosted on the street. Screaming as loud as you can if somebody approaches you. That scares away the bad guy in many instances. Be careful when you're, some safety tips. Don't walk alone at night in a dark area. I mean, that goes without saying. It doesn't matter whether it's a high crime area or not. It's just common sense. It's just the right thing to do. just be careful. If you walk out of a building that night because you're working late, walk with somebody. Have the security officer walk you to your car.
Sure.
Check the car before you get in.
Mhm.
Make sure there's nobody behind the seat. Look in and make sure there's nobody lurking in the back of your car. So you drive away and there's a bad guy in the car. But be careful all the time and aware of your surroundings. So when an event occurs, you have this as the repetition, this training in your mind, in your head, where you act appropriately to save yourself and help other people that might need assistance.
Right, and you bring up a good point. You talk about making noise or screaming. And what a lot of folks may or may not realize that, you know what, on your keychain to your car, most of your cars, there's a little red button called the panic button. What do you think it's for? It's to make a lot of noise. And don't be afraid to push it. There's people that push it just to find their car in a parking lot. But don't be afraid to push that red button if you feel nervous or if you feel threatened. That's what the panic button was designed for. So making noise, whether it's if you're screaming, making noise, whether it's you're engaging the panic button on your car, you could, again, it's okay to be a little bit frightened, but have the mindset of knowing what to do and practice this, Dennis. I mean,
Absolutely, and I think the commissioner hit on it too. Know your surroundings. I mean, know what's going on around you. I mean, today you see too many people with cell phones in their ears, whether it be driving, walking, not aware at all of what's going around them. And as the commissioner said, it doesn't have to be a high crime area. It just has to be a person out there that's looking to take advantage of the situation and do what they're gonna do.
Right.
All right, and you having your head buried into a cell phone and not knowing what you're doing or what's going on around you just leads to that being an easy, you becoming an easy prey.
And you know, when I was training young cops, when I was either a senior officer or when I became a sergeant, one of the things I would always ask Commissioner in the car when I had the rookie, if you will, police officer driving me, I'd be, what street are we on right now? Where are we? Speaking to your point, Dennis, about being aware of your surroundings, one of the first questions I would ask, what street are we on right now? Where are we? Are we heading north, south, east, west? And what street are we on? And how surprising it was for the rookie cop really to look at you during the headlights like, I don't know. Well, it's important that you do.
You know, I just had a flashback. I have to tell you a quick story. At midnight, I see a car pulled over on the side of the road. I pull up behind it, walk up. There's a female in the car, and she's obviously upset. She's in distress. But she wasn't intoxicated. She was coming home from work, and she just didn't feel right. And she pulled over. So I said, look, let me get you an ambulance. Let me take you to the hospital. She was adamant she didn't want that, and I understand why not. She said, I live in the neighborhood. Could you follow me home? Which I did. We get into the neighborhood, we make lefts, right, turns, and then suddenly she pulls over and she faints. She faints, she's out. Now I have to call for rescue. I don't know where I am. Because I wasn't familiar with the area, I didn't pay attention to the streets. I had to run up to the neighbor's door, knock on the door and say, what's your address? He thought I was crazy. He gives me the address, now I can give the address to the rescue people.
Yeah,
She ended up in the hospital.
Delaying
checked out.
precious time.
So that really hit home. I have that flashback. And I mention that story to young cops all the time. Know where you're driving, because you never know when you have to call in an emergency. And if you don't know where you are, it's
Yeah,
useless.
that's the
You
point.
can't get help.
Yeah, and again, if you're just tuning in to Get Secure, we're talking about not panicking during an emergency, how to stay calm, how to stay in control during an emergency. And we're also talking about some safety tips that can help you be prepared in the event of an emergency, and that was getting aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
That is, the hurricane season's coming up, and as I touched on in the beginning of the segment, people rushing out to stores, depleting the shelves. We saw what happened during Superstorm Sandy with the gas lines and the rush. Arguably, a lot of people didn't need to top off their tanks or whatever, and they created long lines, and people that might really need the gas weren't getting the gas. And again, panic, and I know that you were personally affected by Superstorm Sandy. But there's a difference, I think, Dennis, between preparedness and panic.
Yeah, there certainly is, and as Mike mentioned, I took about 5 feet of water in my home, and, you know, devastated 2 years in a row. I mean, through Irene, about 3.5 feet. But I too was on those lines at 3:20 in the morning for approximately 2.5 hours to get gasoline. That's how bad it was, and that was the panic. So again, the preparedness, the second P. Get out there, you know there's a problem, get gasoline ahead of time, way ahead of time. We generally have very good warnings out there. They can't predict exactly what's gonna happen, but you know, with nor'easters, high tides, you live on the water, you know you're gonna have a problem, so prepare for it.
Absolutely. And you know, also from, again, during a crime standpoint, we've talked about in the past, Commissioner, active shooter, and whether it's whether it's part of workplace violence, whether it's at a college or a university. I believe that training and education on these topics of active shooter will help to stop people from panicking and react, even similar to a fire, Dennis, but be able to react in a way that you become more on autopilot as best you can. It's okay to be scared, but not to panic. But if we train and educate our students, our workforce on active shooter and on these situations, I believe the training and education can help people to react better and not panic in an emergency.
Well, you know, especially in the schools, it's amazing that we've come to this point in our society that we got to worry about our children when we send them to school. And the training should include specifically the teachers and the, you know, the people in charge at the school, because they're the ones that can really reduce the injuries and deaths when there's an active shooter. Just a simple thing, by locking the door to your classroom, having the children go down under the desk, away from the windows and the door. And, you know, it reminds me of back in the 50s when the schools were, you know, practicing for atomic weapons. You know, the fear that and some of your listeners will probably have a flashback to that time. Now we're in a different problem. We have a different problem with the active shooter thing. And even though it doesn't happen that often, it's very traumatic and devastating to a community when something happens in the schools. The Connecticut shooting was unbelievably horrible. That's still resonating with people throughout the country. And again, precautions can be taken. Do the drills, explain to the children why they're doing them. And if they need assistance, you know, our security, by the way, we will come into a school district, and offer free presentations on how to keep your community safe and your school safe. So again, as Dennis mentioned, be prepared, because you never know when it's going to happen. It's unfortunate that we have to prepare for this, but again, it's just the time that we're living in today. Not being prepared can, you know, add to the deaths and injuries in a particular place.
Absolutely, and getting the word out. So, you know, I'm hoping that my colleagues in law enforcement and the security field offer you time, offer you services. Your kids go to school, offer to sit on some type of a school safety board to get the word out. You guys have the expertise, you're former law enforcement, you know how to teach these things. You have the essential tools, and it's important to get that word out to keep our kids safe and to get secure, and that's the theme of this show. So, great discussion, gentlemen, today, and thank you,
Thanks, Mike.
and thank you as always. And certainly a topic that we're going to have to revisit, because I think it's important to have the repetitiveness, if you will, in getting the word out to the folks about keeping themselves safe and getting secure, which is the name of this show. So again, I'm your host, Mike Langiforti. Special thanks to Corinne Carroll and the folks at the Blue Chippers at Blue Chip Marketing for making this show possible. Much appreciated, Corinne. So remember, get Arrow, get secure. Have a great week, everybody.